church, and happy Mother's Day to all. I know, like a lot of you, I had one beautiful, wonderful mother that I will always be in debt to for both who I am, being alive in general, because she didn't get rid of me, because come on, look at this. I was a pain. But no, my mom, she's wonderful, and I couldn't have asked for a better mother. But I've also been blessed with a lot of other mother figures in my life. Mothers who helped disciple me and train me to be the person I am today, who may be insufferable at times. Am a diligent believer in Christ who is striving to reflect Jesus every day. I think of there's a person at my church growing up that I referred to as Mama Gordon, Brenda, who was the head of our children's ministry, who helped raise me in my love of children and wanting to work with kids and share my love for Christ with them. I had Mama Deal, who was one of the other ladies at our church, Rhonda Deal, who was just a wonderful example of a Christian life. I had mothers, even as I grew up into college, Mama Brumley, Ann Brumley, who was the church secretary and the mother of one of my best friends in college, who again was an example of Christian living, who taught me both in Bible studies that we would have together at the church with her insight, but also examples from her life that she could share with me. And I'm thankful to all of the mothers that I've had, and I know that you all as well. So I just wanted to share a few of those names this morning. Back in college, I was on a different path than where I ended up, because initially I was in business school because I had no idea what I wanted to do, honestly. Honestly, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had this idea of an arcade that I wanted to own because I thought that would be cool. And I thought, well, maybe I should learn some business. And in business school, we did a lot of studying of other businesses. We did case studies that we would look at businesses, both what to do, but as also what not to do. And we would spend, not just in managerial class, but if in my financial accounting classes, we would do case studies of businesses. What did they do well? What did they do wrong? We would try to emulate the success stories, but also be aware of the cautionary tales of failures to avoid both small mistakes that might accrue over time to become a giant failure, but also giant catastrophic mistakes that happened all at once. When we would do these case studies, we would look at their finances. We would look at their corporate culture or their corporate structure. But one of the things that we would always do is you would look at their vision statements and their mission statements. Now, vision statements are kind of their ideal of what they're hoping to achieve, but the mission statement is how they're hoping to get there. We're going to do a little game. This is a game called, Wait, What Mission? And I'm going to show you some mission statements of companies. And I just want you to yell out if you can, or which company you think it is. Okay? So the first one is some of them are easy, some of them are kind of hard. So the first one is to provide access to the world's information in one click. That's the vision statement. And the mission statement is to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful. Let's see if we can get that up. What I heard? Google. Yeah, that's Google. Famously, their vision statement at one time involved the words, "Don't be evil," which are not part of their vision statement anymore. I can't remember exactly when they took that out, but it was legitimately their vision statement, "Don't be evil." You can argue, and people will argue whether or not they were ever on the light side. I don't know. I have a Pixel phone, and I use only Google stuff, so I don't know. I don't know where I sit in that. All right, next one. Working with our compassionate communities, we will end pet homelessness and animal suffering. What do you think that is? Dumb Friends League. It's the Dumb Friends League. We have one of those here in Denver. All right, next one is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable transportation and energy. Tesla, absolutely. The next one, our vision for the future, spreading goodness in all the right directions, we're committed, in the mission statement, we're committed to taking the lead in efforts to protect the environment. Now, this one's a tough one. It's not Walmart. Not Vitamin Cottage. All right, this one's Hershey. Hershey. Okay? It's a little tougher. All right, the last one. This is one of my favorite mission statements. To be the best, our unique success is based on caring for and cultivating people, delighting our customers, and growing responsibly. Not Walmart, no. Not Starbucks. Discount Tire. So sometimes these statements are spot on because you can see them and identify them immediately, right? Tesla, that was pretty identifiable. Sustainable, environmentally friendly, whatever it was. But, okay, Hershey's is just caring about the environment. Is that? I mean, it sounds nice. This one right here, how is this about tires at all? It doesn't seem to be about tires at all. So sometimes they're spot on. Sometimes they just seem like people or companies are just blowing smoke. They wrote down something that sounded nice, and they went with that. But these mission statements are supposed to be a concise description of how they're going to achieve their goals, or what their goal is to achieve, what their purpose is to exist. So what about the church? What's the church's mission statement? Now, we could call it a co-mission statement. I heard it's a pretty good one. Might even be a great one. We call it the Great Commission. The church's core mission is to go and make disciples of all people, baptizing them, teaching them, showing them, training them to follow all that Christ has commanded us to do. And if we go to the next one there, Jared, one of my favorites is we're going to talk more about the last one there that I highlighted and read, to behold. That's next week. That's just a sneak peek of what the command to behold means as part of this Great Commission. So we're supposed to go and make disciples of all people, baptizing them, teaching them, showing them, training them to follow all that Christ has commanded us. It's a pretty simple, concise statement, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Simple and easy are not the same thing. So now why? Why is making disciples the focus, the main core mission of the church? Is it just about growing the church? Yes. But it's not just about numbers. It's not about putting buns in the pews. That's not what making disciples are. Robert talked about that last week. Making disciples is not just getting more people in the pews. It's not about increasing the pool of those who will give to bolster the church's budget. That's not what making disciples is all about. It's about building towards God's kingdom. Now, how do we do that? When we look in the Bible and we see stories of people converting, we see these giant conversions, like at Pentecost where 5,000 all converted at once. And it's not about having big events to bring a lot of people in, to have these giant spikes of growth. That's not what making disciples is. It's not about these giant, huge things. That's like using gasoline to start a fire for a campfire. It might have an explosive start, but unless you have some fuel there to burn, something quality wood fuel, it's not going to last and it's not going to be worth anything. That gas will burn up in a very quick amount of time. I'm not sure. How fast does gasoline burn up? Like if you put a gallon of gas, fast. But you need the wood fuel to make it sustained so that it has value and it's not just a bright burning light. It has to have fuel and substance for it to be valuable. And that's what discipleship is. It's not about numerical growth instantly and giant. It's about substance. The core mission of the church is not just to provide a comfortable place to sit and feel like a good person, but it's to train and equip disciples to be willing to get uncomfortable for the sake of sharing the gospel. We can see this in Jesus' own ministry. While Jesus was out, he was teaching and doing miracles, and all of these people were hearing about it, and they were coming to Jesus, and he fed 5,000 of them. People were excited. He left. He went to the other side of a lake, and they heard about it, and they ran to the other side of the lake. They took boats, and they commissioned them to get over there just so that they could be with Jesus because they wanted to be close to him. And what does he do? He sits and talks with them about how if they really want to be true disciples, they need to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. He started teaching things that were difficult. He had a bunch of people who seemed like they were on board, and he went to something difficult and hard to understand because it's not just about numbers. Jesus wasn't just looking for numbers. We're going to read that specifically right here. He says, but then, when his teachings got difficult, many of them left. This is in John chapter 6, 60 through 66. When many of the disciples heard it, they said, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, and he said to them, do you take offense to this? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is of no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who those were who did not believe, and who it was that would betray him. And he said, this is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father. After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. So why would Jesus choose to teach something he knew would cause people to struggle and inevitably leave? It's because it wasn't about the numbers. Discipleship is more than just attendance. Disciple is committed. That's what Christ wanted. He wanted commitment, true commitment. This kind of commitment doesn't just happen. Very rarely does this type of commitment come from an epiphany of some sort. It doesn't occur in a vacuum. Perhaps it can be sparked by that moment of clarity, that moment of epiphany where you're like, of course, Jesus is real. But it is not sustained from that. It requires support to have sustained growth. We can see this in Paul's ministry. When Paul was first Saul, he was at first zealously rooting out Christians because he believed that they were blaspheming against God. And then he had that moment of clarity on the road to Damascus, where he was confronted with Christ himself. Now, did he just immediately leave and begin preaching on his own? No, he did not. First, he spent time with the disciples there in Damascus. Then he sought out other disciples in Jerusalem to connect with them more, to hear from them more. He met with some resistance because his name carried some baggage, to say the least. But despite that baggage, one of them, Barnabas, chose to take him under his wing and go with him, to be with Paul, to be with Saul, as Saul began his ministry, to disciple Saul, so that he could have a faith that was sustained, so that commitment could be sustained, so that it would be real and long-lasting and have value. Living out this mission is a journey. It's a journey that we individually have to take, but by no means are meant to take that journey as an individual. Does that kind of make sense? We have to make the choice ourselves, but we're not meant to do it alone. We're meant to do it as a church, as a body, as a group of believers together, holding each other up, correcting one another in love, keeping each other focused on the mission when so many things try to get in the way. In Galatians 6, 1-6, we're called to bear one another's burdens. Chapter before that, it talks about how we're, as Christians, supposed to be walking in step with the Spirit. And while we're walking in step with the Spirit together as a church, when we see someone stumble, we're not supposed to ridicule them. We're not supposed to point at them and tell them that they need to pick themselves up to get in line. We're called to help them up, to share with them in that burden, so that they can have the strength to move forward. Sometimes that means encouraging them, just with, pointing out all the good that they are doing so that they can have the strength to continue doing good. Sometimes it means to admonish them and point out what's wrong so that they can correct it. But in all, they're supposed to be serving and teaching one another so that we can strive together towards that goal that we cannot reach on our own. That's what makes discipleship hard. Because being a disciple of Christ means, the easy part is being willing to tell someone else when they're doing wrong, when they're not in step with the Spirit. The hard part is being willing to hear when you're doing wrong, to being willing to listen to our brothers and sisters correct us. That's the hard one. So how do we disciple? Well, we have to pour ourselves fully into one another. We can't hold anything back. Surface level relationships is just not enough for discipleship. It requires, you have to put the relationship into discipleship. You have to have that connection. You have to pour yourself fully into it. Because discipleship is a relational process. Jesus didn't spend his entire ministry jet setting or donkey setting, I guess, around that region, just hitting every single place, making the rounds. He traveled, but while he traveled, he taught. But in his 3-year ministry, he spent most of his time with who? 12 and change. In the reading we did just a second ago, he basically scared away a bunch of people because they weren't ready yet to hear it. But who was ready? The 12. Why were they ready? Well, Jesus said, 1, God made them ready. But 2, he had been spending time with them, talking with them, teaching them individually, sharing with them the truth, showing them who he was. Jesus could have been teleporting around the world to spread the message to everybody. I have no doubt in my mind that God could do that. But he didn't do that. Instead, he sent Jesus to a small part of a small region on the edge of the world at the time to teach really just 12 so that it could spread from there. Paul traveled quite a bit more than Jesus. Granted, his ministry was about 30 years rather than just 3. But even Paul, his journey was not that of a donkey, camel, ship-setting celebrity preacher. He didn't just hit all of the big cities and stay there for a night to spread the word, to say the good things and leave and go. He spent time with every church that he planted. He devoted 3 years, 10% of his ministry, 10% just in one place in Ephesus. It's a long time to devote to just one place whenever his goal was Rome and Spain and the rest of the world. But Paul knew that he couldn't just do it on a surface level. He had to do it right. And that meant pouring himself completely into the people that he was discipling. Teaching them, training them to lead so that they would continue to grow that church once he left. We could see that he poured himself so fully into it because in Acts chapter 20, we can see what he was doing at the end, towards the end of his ministry. He was heading to Jerusalem, and he was pretty sure it was going to be the last time. He was pretty sure, whether by just reasonable assumption or divine revelation, that once he got to Jerusalem, he was going to be arrested, and that was going to be the end, at least the beginning of the end. So much so that he wouldn't be able to go back to Ephesus. And he was right. And so on his way back to Jerusalem, he stopped outside of Ephesus, about 75 miles actually. It wasn't close. He called for them to come and visit him. And so they did. They came, and he spent time with them again, grieving with them that he wouldn't be able to see them again. But reminding them of all the time that they spent together in tears and in truth. Through trials and celebrations. He loved those people dearly because he poured himself into them so completely. He wasn't afraid to teach them difficult things when they needed to hear it. He showed them house to house what it was like to follow Jesus. He held nothing back. Reflecting on what they taught or what he had taught them so that they would have faith to continue to push forward even after they didn't have an opportunity to see them again. Recently, it's been difficult to mirror that kind of pouring ourselves completely into each other's lives. For the last few years, there have been things that got in the way of being able to spend that much time personally with one another. In some ways, we rose to the challenge, finding new ways to connect. New ways when the old ways just weren't possible. But in a lot of ways, we fell pretty short. Both corporately and individually. We reverted to a survival mode when faced with these kind of difficulties. And this isn't just Southeast. This is the church around the world. Similar conversations being had, similar situations being seen in big cities and small cities and in the Bible Belt or far from the Bible Belt. The church has struggled these last few years. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Missouri about this just yesterday. About how churches are shrinking and what we can do about it. And I told him kind of what we're going to be talking about here for the next couple weeks. In 2020 and in the next couple years, we faced as a church, as the greater global church, we faced a stress test. And we found some pretty big holes. Businesses face stress tests. Banks have to go through them semi-regularly, probably not as often as they should, to see if they're able to stand up if things go bad. And as a church, we faced a stress test with this whole pandemic and fill in blanks for the rest of 2021 and into 22. Where we thought we were in a position of strength, we were actually, it was kind of facade. It wasn't quite as strong as we thought it was. And what we can do about that is there are basically two things you can do. You can quit or you can push forward. You can quit and say, well, This level of focus of discipleship, this level of dedication is just not possible in our modern world. We better, there are too many distractions, too many responsibilities, too many other obligations. We might as well just settle or compromise what our mission is so that we can feel satisfied and not missing that goal. That's one option. I don't think it's the right one. I don't think we should stop striving for more. I don't think we should be satisfied with less. Because even though it can feel like it, I don't think that discipleship is impossible in our modern world. I don't think it is at all. I don't think that we should change our mission from going and making disciples to just making sure that we stay disciples, because those are two very different missions, and one of them is wholly lacking. Though it can sometimes feel like it, it's never too late to get back on the right path. Yes, our churches and churches around the world have become or have yet to return to those pre-pandemic numbers that we were hoping for. Yes, it seems like the whole world is drifting farther and farther away from Christian ideals and moral centers that we had lived fairly close to for most of our lives. Many of you, if you think back to your childhood and you look at our world today, you feel like they're two completely different moral worlds. Yes, there's not as many kids or families or teens or 20-somethings as there was even like 5 or 6 years ago. I remember when we first came to this church in 2012, like one of the things that we were excited about was how many kids were here. There were so many kids. But the amount of young families and kids, that kind of shrunk even before the pandemic. And it's just because people moved away. And other people didn't move in. These struggles that we are facing, that we see, they're not brand new. So what do we do about it? Do we just go to that survival mode? And I say no. The answer isn't to shift into survival mode as a church. The path is the same path that it's always been. And that path requires us to focus on what the mission is. It's to build up the church. And to do that by investing time, care, and attention into one another. The secret to having a thriving children's ministry isn't to have giant, big, huge events so that lots of kids come. It's to have a place where people who come can find that family and connection. Does it help if there are a bunch of young 20-somethings to have new 20-somethings come in and feel like there's a place for them? Absolutely. But you know what you need? You need to have actual connection with those 20-somethings. For them to feel like this is their home and not just a place where they see some people that they know. We have to pour ourselves into one another so that we become a family that is healthy. So that when visitors come, they see health, not just a pretty face. The path is the same. We have to invest in each other. We have to train, admonish, and encourage one another to continue to live faithfully. Because Jesus is very much living within every single one of us. But his fullness is not seen in the individual, but rather in us as a whole, together. One of the most difficult things is that we have to reiterate and remind ourselves and others is that there's no such thing as a part-time disciple. We kind of want there to be that position because that sounds enticing, sounds doable, simple, easy. But there's no such thing as being a part-time disciple. Also, you can't be discipled against your will. You have to make that choice. And it's more than just the choice you make at the very beginning when you put on Christ in baptism, because that's just the start. Discipleship is making that choice every day. Jesus in Luke 9:23 says that daily you must take up your cross. You must take up your cross daily and follow him. To deny yourself what you want to do and choose to follow Jesus. Paul echoes that in Romans 12, where he says, you must present yourself as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to him. A living sacrifice, one that has a choice to leave the altar but chooses not to. When things get difficult, they could choose to go somewhere else, but you say, no, that this is important. My faith is important. Being faithful is important. Sharing in this struggle is important. Helping my neighbor is important, even though it's hard. We have to choose to continue every day, to choose to be a disciple, to choose to allow others to help train you up, and choose to take on the mission of training others. Which means we have to open ourselves up to others. We can't just help and then keep our own struggles over here. It just doesn't work that way. So what is the church? What is it for? What isn't it for? The church is not a place to pursue Christ as a hobby in your spare time. No, it's a place to stretch and grow yourself as you prepare to serve God in both big and small ways. Again, like I said earlier, it's about being in a place where you can learn and study and train so that you can be uncomfortable. It's not a place to find comfort. The church is not a bustling social club of like-minded, faithful fellow believers where you can feel safe. But rather, it's a body of believers who push and are willing to be pushed to strive towards being unsafe, towards the goal of reflecting Christ in all we do. It's about iron sharpening iron. That's what the church is for. That's what discipleship is. And it's not an easy process. The church's purpose isn't just to survive until the end days. Rather, the purpose is to thrive and to continue building into one another and making new disciples until the end days. To spread the good news of Christ so that even more can have a chance to accept it and accept His grace so that they too can dwell with Him in heaven. This is your mission if you choose to accept it. And that mission is discipleship. It's not about stamping a time card, sitting in a pew, or getting wet that one time. Our purpose, our mission, is to make disciples. That's what our focus needs to be. And that's what the elders have decided that our focus is going to be. To make disciples. Most of us here today, theoretically, have already made the decision that you want to be a disciple. If you haven't already or are curious about it, let's talk to me afterwards. We could talk more about it because discipleship is important. Putting on Christ is important. Accepting His grace is important. And sharing that love is important. And I want to do that. We all want to do that. But for those of us who did put Christ on in baptism, who have made the statement of faith that they are followers of Christ and disciples of Christ, we got to ask ourselves the one question. And that's the question where we're going to leave with in just a couple seconds. The question is, are we following that mission statement? Or are we just blowing smoke? Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, in our world today, it feels almost insurmountable to be able to put in what we believe to be our fullness into serving you and loving one another and pouring ourselves completely into one another. There are so many things that try to take our focus away from you and away from each other. Responsibilities, obligations, entertainment, desires. Things that pull us into this idea that we can serve you part-time and that's good enough. But God, we know that that's not true. We know that we can't just serve you part-time. But we also, Lord, I think we know that we can afford to pour ourselves completely into one another and into the purpose of following your mission that you've set before us. We're just afraid to do it. We're afraid of opening ourselves up to vulnerability by living so connected with one another, by sharing our pains and our worries and our burdens. We're afraid of what might happen if we truly do share our faith with those around us. We're afraid of rejection or persecution. Sometimes, Lord, we're just afraid of awkwardness. But God, we want to serve you. So please give us strength. Open our eyes to opportunities to live faithfully and true to you. Give us the strength to open ourselves to one another so that we can disciple one another and be discipled by one another, trained up to know what you look like, to what serving you looks like, to walk step for step with one another as we strive for your mission of sharing your love and grace with this whole world. God, let us not be blowing smoke, but let our faith live faithfully each day. Let it present itself in big and small ways to all that we meet as we strive to serve you. So in your name we pray. Amen. God bless you.